Deliverance is quite an ambitious project.
When it's released, it doesn't mean that it's finished. It's going to build upon itself in story. Up until this point, my inspiration for the best Christian product ever was VeggieTales, because it was really, really good for what it was, right? So one of the ways that I wanted this to be authentic is that the art needed to make a statement that the game takes itself seriously.
Well, welcome folks to another exciting episode of the Crowdfunding Nerds. And we've decided to do something slightly different today. We're starting a new series because we interviewed the folks at Iridia and people really seem to enjoy that episode. So we decided to make this into somewhat of a series. We're going to be dissecting some of our past clients, some of their successes, but we figured, well, why not start with our very own project, Deliverance? So we have the Deliverance team with us today, Andrew, whom you're familiar with, and Chazz and Dan. So folks, maybe you just want to quickly introduce yourselves, let people know who you are and what is your involvement with Deliverance.
Sure. I am the co-host of the Crowdfunding Nerds podcast, Andrew Lowen, for those of you that don't know. I'm the lead designer of Deliverance. I made Deliverance.
My name's Chazz. I help with a lot of the game design, game development, lots of playtesting, and Discord moderation.
I'm Dan. I do the art, a lot of the graphic design stuff. I do some game design stuff, some managing the day-to-day stuff, and kind of keeping projects on task stuff. Quite a few different things, but mostly art.
Andrew, maybe just enlighten people of the scale of the project and sort of how successful it's been. I know that you've sold over 10,000 units of the game. You've been, I suppose, developing and marketing and publishing it for half a decade at this point or more. So maybe just for those who maybe aren't familiar, they might have heard of it from the podcast, or they might know about it, but maybe just give a quick introduction of the kind of scale and scope of the project so that people have a bit more familiarity in terms of what Deliverance is and how successful it's been.
Sure. So, the game has, between the base game and the expansion, is sold just over 10,000 units between the first Kickstarter's print run fully selling out. It was 5,000 units. And then the next Kickstarter selling around 5,000 more between the Pledge Manager and the Kickstarter. Through crowdfunding, we've done about $830,000. And then through pledge management, we've done maybe 600,000 more. And then, we sold out the first run. It's about $2 million in funding that we've raised, all in all. And it was just kind of started as a goal of, I wish this game existed, and because I wanted to play it. And I decided at some point along the way that there was no one else in the whole world that would make it if I didn't. And so that's where I became motivated to kind of make it happen. And I actually didn't want to make a publishing company. I really wanted someone else to publish it. And so I did everything that I thought I needed to do in order to make it attractive. I don't know, I'm tangenting into something else, but I really didn't want to be a publisher. And because I already had a business, I have this digital marketing business. And so, I figured if I could make a really awesome game that had super duper appeal to a hardcore group of fans, and I built an email list of people that were excited to get it. And I did all the art, or rather, I led the kind of the team and we had the art done, which is where Dan comes in. Then surely people would want to jump on the bandwagon and do all the publishing stuff. If I, it's like a nice little present with a bow on top, ready to go. You just open it and you have another evergreen hit in your collection. That's what I thought I would do, and in the end, it came down to either, companies wanting to buy it off of me and me having no say in what it is they did with the product, which is a problem for me, or, the money that I had invested, they were like, well, that's just, sunk cost. We're going to pay you a tiny small royalty. Or somebody felt like I got multiple publishing offers, but it just felt like none of them would end up with a product that was like, another company was like, hey, yeah, we'll give you 20% of whatever we sell, which I figure would be a lot. That's a really good deal, super good deal. But they were like, we don't want to make a campaign. We feel like it needs just like 5 scenario missions and that's it. Well, wait, I feel like it really needs a campaign. And that's, again, the core fundamental belief was that I need to make this game into the thing that I wish existed in the world. And, I, as a fan, feel like there were a lot of people like me out there and that wished a game like this existed too. And so we ended up deciding if anybody's going to do it, it's going to be us. The one company that I felt like was going to be a really good fit, and I still think would have been a really good fit, they decided that basically they had too much on their plate and couldn't take it on, which was totally fair. But still friends with people at that company to this day. So.
Because Deliverance is quite an ambitious project in that it has miniatures, it's got a skirmish mode, it's got a campaign mode. You have I suppose a quarterly, download that people can play. There's a lot happening. I know this is a conversation that you and I had, Andrew, about Deliverance, and that you really wanted to make it into a lifestyle game. Could you really explain what was your kind of thought process behind a lifestyle game, and what exactly is a lifestyle game, and why did you try to create something that was, I suppose, so ambitious? Because it's not just like, hey, I want to create a board game and then, yes, my first game, I'm going to shelve this and move on to another IP. No, you've continued to develop this IP. You've brought in staff like Chazz and Dan here, and you've sort of expanded the team. And it seems like it's just grown and grown and grown. I know you've been working on video games, and there's been like podcasts and sound documentaries and things so it's been quite extensive. So outline maybe your thought process of why you wanted to make this a lifestyle game, and how exactly did that come about?
Sure. So for me, I guess the pinnacle of lifestyle games that I think about would be like Magic the Gathering, Warhammer 40K, things that keep local game stores in business, period, right? And so I have no illusions that Deliverance could be on the same level as games like that, where every Friday you're playing or whatever. But I felt like, I guess the way that I felt Deliverance should be a lifestyle game is that it is when you buy the box, it represents a system that you get to play, and once you play through the campaign, you've got the skirmish mode that you can come back to and things like that. And even if you put the box away, because there are other things that you want to get to the table, I guess the reason that I feel like it's we've made it actually into that kind of lifestyle game category in some ways is because people have reasons to take the box off the shelf and play it again. And, they're getting regular doses of new content in those quarterly releases. They're getting, we just released our first massive expansion, or rather, we funded, and we're about 6 months or 5 months from releasing it into the world. And I think that the idea that I have behind the lifestyle game concept is it's a game that should, when it's released, it doesn't mean that it's finished. It's going to build upon itself in story. So I wanted to give people a reason to kind of take the game off the shelf again and play it. Instead of, sometimes, you just crave a particular game, you'll take it off the shelf because you wanted to experience that thing again. You play one game and you're like, yeah, that reminds me of all of those experiences I had, and you put it back. That is what I consider like a standard experience. But if you're taking, so that is not a lifestyle game in and of itself. But if you take the game off the shelf because you're like, hey, there's new content to enjoy, I'm going to take the same box I had and open up and play something new. Or there's a reason that you're taking something out. Maybe the game is also your favorite game to introduce players to for whatever reason. Maybe you play it at every convention. Maybe you challenge yourself and others with the game to, because there are certain modes that are really, really difficult or whatever. That's what I would consider more of a lifestyle game. And I think that a game like that, you would probably get 20 plays in a year or more, 15 to 30 plays, I guess. And if, I know that if a game gets even 2 plays, that it actually gets more than the average game typically receives. Most people take the game out, spend one, maybe a half of a game learning how to play it, and then they will reset it and play one full game, and that's maybe all that you would play of that board game in a year. And just depending on, of course, the types of circles that you travel in, and the amount of time you have and all that. So to get somebody that does that with a game to bust Deliverance out and play it 20 times in a year is, I think, that to me, Deliverance is that person's lifestyle game. So that makes sense.
And then I suppose those people who've played a lot of Deliverance and they're already involved in your communities, I know your Discord is very active. And maybe Chazz and Dan, you both can speak into this, because I know that both of you actually work on playtesting. You kind of bounce ideas with each other. How has the community shaped the Deliverance? I know that there's obviously some people who are super passionate, and then there might be some people who aren't as so, but they still want to have an input. How do you balance the kind of input from the community, from people who are super passionate and are very opinionated on certain ideas, and to those who maybe are less so, but they still have very valid concerns and things? How do you draw the balance between developing Deliverance and these game mechanics around people who maybe know the game inside out versus people who are very unfamiliar with the game?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is just being in communication with our community, being able to talk with them and engage with them in a lot of different ways. Facebook being one of them, and Discord being the other really major one, where we can actually engage and have conversations with them, ask them ideas on what they would like to see in the game or what they like or don't like about a certain mission. Because that's a big part of playtesting. At least for me personally, it's not just getting this thing that I've made for them to a table where they can touch it and see it and feel it and play with it. It's actually seeing how that evokes certain emotions or certain reactions when they're playing something. One of my favorite reactions to get when I'm playtesting with them is seeing them in dread as they discover like what I've made for them, and hearing them say, "Why are you laughing at my pain?" But it's really interesting to see them be challenged and pushed, and ask them, okay, so when you had that moment of how are we going to overcome this, was it enjoyable, or was it just like punishing for punishing's sake? And that's not something that I feel you can do unless you have developed that community where you can sit down with them. And I have a core group of like 10 to 15 people that I play test with regularly that I trust, from all forms of experiences, from brand new to veterans of the game, that I can go to and ask them at different play experience levels and say, how does this make you feel? What do you like or not like about this? And what parts of the games would you like to see developed and created? And a lot of times they'll give really cool ideas that are just that. They're really cool, not really great for mechanics or for implementing into a game. But we can take that, and Dan and I will sit with that and go, okay, they like this feeling. They like this emotion. They like this challenge. They like this power fantasy of some kind. How can we develop that into something that is mechanically sound, that does give the same feeling? And we spend a lot of time making sure that with those people that have those specific ideas or this specific vision on like, I really like this and I want this to kind of make its way into the game somehow, that as we're developing it, I'm, kicking it back to them and saying, well, play this. Does this still give that same feeling? And being able to develop that community and develop that, for me personally in the Discord is where I do that a lot, is been invaluable. And it goes all the way back to the very beginning of even just the vision of what Andrew has for the game, is just something to reach out and make community with. Because I didn't start with Deliverance, as a part of like the design team or the development team. Like I reached out to Andrew and asked him if he had a Discord, because I knew that was a really good place for creators to meet with their playtesters. And he said he had one, but wasn't really interested in like developing it very much. And that had been something I had done previously with other games and like clans for like Destiny and some other games that I had been playing. So I offered to make it for him, and it just kind of grew in that aspect of being involved in the community, making sure that the community is a part of your planning and your discussion, but that they don't take the reins away from you, because that's something that can oftentimes be a struggle. It's like, well, I think that's really cool too, and you just kind of run with it. But that's where Dan kind of comes alongside me, is like we work together to make sure that it's mechanically sound and that we're going back and forth with each other and with the play testers to make sure that this thing that we're making is fun but also balanced. Because as I will sometimes call it like just throwing spaghetti at the wall or making it as hard as I can. We'll make things dialed to like 11 because we have a really cool idea and it's really fun and broken and either really hard, really fun, whatever it is. And we have to kind of rein that back. So a lot of times with the play testers, we'll go into the first session and they're beat within like the first round. And they're like, yeah, that didn't work, but that was fun. We see what we're doing. So we're trying to, mold it and shape it like with clay into the form that we want it to be.
And then Dan, I suppose, does the same thing happen with the art? Do you submit any like rough drawings or sketches to the community, get their feedback? Is there sort of like a similar iteration process with how the art is developed, or is that all sort of behind closed doors and you only kind of reveal finished works?
I would say more of the latter with that one. We took quite a bit of time in the very beginning of Deliverance, really developing a style that we wanted Deliverance to be. And it was mostly this Andrew's vision. So my goal was to communicate with Andrew a bunch during the beginning and really understand what his vision for what Deliverance should look like is. And at this point, I've got a pretty good grasp on it. So I can, for the most part, go and work on things and kind of bring progress here and there. But at the beginning, it was a lot of back and forth of like, no, that's not quite right. That's too intimidating or too scary for the angels that we want, or our guideline for kind of like the females in the game are, if I saw my daughter dressed up as it in cosplay, would I just cringe and just despise seeing that? And if that's the case, we need to add some more layers of clothing and stuff to it or something like that, or change the form a bit. So like we want things to kind of fit within this lane that we've established. And for the most part, we don't get the community too involved in that because too many cooks in the kitchen can kind of mess with that a bit. And it took a while to really develop that. But that being said, we love releasing stuff and getting people's feedback on it. And we have made some changes from feedback, but for the most part, that's something that's done behind closed doors more so. For the feedback with the game development stuff, that is definitely something we have made a lot more changes from. A lot of times we don't make changes just because people don't know how everything connects. And we would be like, yeah, that would be a cool idea, but it would completely break this, that, and the other. And a lot of times people like things way too much, and we're like, why do they like this so much? And then we go and look and it's completely broken. That's why everyone's using it. And then we have to take a Nerf bat to it. So
yeah. I remember we ran this raid event. So we do this Deliverance raid event. So like one of the things we try to do in regard to lifestyle, we try to support how people want to play the game. And then also I think it's really important to kind of cast a vision for how the game could be played. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite experiences from back in the day was raiding in games like World of Warcraft, where you bring 25 people or 40 people or 10 people into a dungeon and slay bosses and whatnot. And so we created an experience like that we can run. And the most recent time we ran, it was like close to 40 players. I think it was like 38 players in a room, all fighting against a single boss. And we had a ton of fun with that, but it's one of those things that I don't think people realize that that's even possible until you present it to them. And then when they're like, they see it, I've had feedback from players like, I don't see any way that this could possibly be good, but because it's the Deliverance team, I'll give it a try. And, it explodes their mind by the end. So.
Yeah, there are several ideas that made their way into the game and into the pipeline just because other people spoke up and were like, I think this would be a really cool idea to try and really cool thing to do. One of them being the scenarios is just something that we decided like we want to put out something quarterly, whether that's like art or something for them to engage in. And then somebody was just like, well, what if we did just like some little mini missions that they can do, and we'll design them and we can send them out every quarter. 4 months, 3 months will give us enough time to develop something and put it out there. And it's been really, really well received. People really enjoy it. People like seeing the different ways they can interact with the game. And that the scenarios really was where I was able to kind of stretch my wings out a little bit and really try some of the new mechanics, try some of the new special rules, and just kind of push the comfort boundaries of Dan and Andrew a little bit more. It's like, what if it did hit as hard as a truck, and it only was in this special rule scenario, and that was a part of the mechanic, and you have to try to get around the rules to accomplish that and challenge the players. A small little feedback on that really shows how far we've come in the scenarios department. The first scenario we released was called Cruel Hearthers. It was an awful pun on cruel archers, but I loved it and Andrew loved it and everybody else groaned at it, but we thought it was hilarious because you have to put out the hearths around the town and you're fighting cruel archers. But that mission hit like a truck. And we thought internally it was like fine. And then when it got to players, it was not. And, getting that feedback from them and talking about it, I think that mission went through like 5 different iterations before we finally landed on it. And it's just this really cool feedback of like, we got destroyed, but it was still fun. And, I don't know very many games where you can say I still had fun losing. And Deliverance is one of those games for me and many others. But that feedback of going back and forth with how can we develop this that plays into people's lifestyle, where we don't always do it, but the first couple scenarios we tried to tie it with the season. So like the Cruel Hearthers was the first one that was around Christmas time, and that was a winter scenario. And we did one for like a fall farmers market. And so that came out around, August, September. But other times it's just like, what can we do to really push our players, to challenge them? Because that's another thing, is like, we don't want them to just stagnate in their skills. We want them to get better. We want them to learn and engage with different mechanics that make even the veteran that, beat the hardest difficulty, Abyssal solo, question whether or not they can beat this mission. And that's something that I think is really fun to strive for and develop for our community.
Tabletone is a phenomenal app. I use it every time I play tabletop role-playing games with my family. It greatly enhances the immersive experience. In fact, it's night and day using it and not using it. It can also be used for board games or any card game. It's great background music. It's made by a company based in Austria who have their own studio, who have developed their own software specifically to cater to your specific needs within the different game settings. So you can control intensity, there's different background noises. You can get it for free, and there's also a trial that you can run for 2 weeks that will give you full access to their entire catalog of sounds and audio. Definitely check it out. Link is in the description. Visit tabletone.app for more details.
Yeah, the difficulty levels is because, when a first timer takes the game and is like, I'm going to play Cruel Hearthers, and, with their group of friends, there has to be a way that they can beat the game, without just feeling hopeless and, oh, you didn't know all these, the 12 rules of hidden, if you want to beat Deliverance, you have to know these 12 things. We need some version of the experience that the new player can play, find challenging, but still overcome. And another version that the veteran that easily would whoop the lowest difficulty has to, again, experience challenge. And so we came up with, originally the system was multiple difficulty levels. We have these cards in the game that we call talents. They are for the demons or the bad guys in Deliverance. They add more health and give them new abilities. So you have like meddling imps, which typically swarm you and throw spears, and they're like tiny little damage, I don't know, they just don't deal that much damage, but they swarm in great numbers. Well, certain talents might link all of their health together, and they might start to poison you if they're next to you. Is kind of the idea. We have a status effect called Wither, that if they, or maybe they become explosive, where they could walk towards you and explode if you get too close, and that totally changes the experience of the fight. And or maybe just simply by existing, they're going to cause darkness to come into play. Or maybe if you defeat them, they actually, something bad happens for each one that drops. So 6 of them on the battlefield is it feels much different when all of their health is linked together. So if you damage one, it divides damage evenly among the others. Or if they explode or whatever, that changes mechanically the fight. So that was the intent with, we're going to add more of those abilities in, and that, as the difficulty level scales higher, and that's going to make people, number one, it's going to change the play experience every time and give those veterans something new, like a new flavor of the game. But we really found like that was enough for the beginning. So some people are total psychopaths. They're like, what's the hardest difficulty you got? I'm only playing on that one. And other people are like, I'm not bad at games, but I like to win them. So I'm going to go like, what's the easiest difficulty? I'm going to add 1 to that, or maybe 2 if I become familiar enough, So you have different like styles of player behavior. And then you have other people that are like, I'm not good at these games, or I like to win, so I'm playing the lowest difficulty. And, as long as the game is fun at each of those places, then I think that's an overall win for everybody. But we came up with this additional concept, which is the challenge. So the challenge mode of every mission or scenario, whatever it is that we do, has a challenge mode to it that has a special additional set of conditions that are not, typically not related to talents alone, but there's something else. Like the very first mission of Deliverance is a training mission that teaches you how to kind of move in combat. So the base game, the very first mission of the campaign. So you learn to move and attack and use your resources to kind of, you build resources and then use them to unleash stronger attacks. And by the end of that first mission, generally how the game works, and combat works. But then the challenge mode to that mission is, so you have to defeat all the enemies within 4 rounds, because if it goes to round 5, you automatically lose. And that's the condition for that particular mission. But then the challenge is you have to defeat all the enemies in 1 single round, which is much more difficult, requires a little more skill, but also requires more items. So it gives players another reason to return to that mission and attempt the higher difficulty. And then the people that are veterans are going to try to return to that mission earlier, like as early as they can, and say, I think I mathed it out. I think I can do it. And then people who are new will maybe they'll complete more missions, gain more experience, have more items, and be stronger. And then all of a sudden, that defeat all the enemies in 1 round is easy. So that's kind of a way to satisfy both the veterans with their hunger for challenge, as well as the newbies with their desire to just simply stand a chance at the lowest difficulty, right?
So Andrew, I want to say it was around 2015, 2016 that Deliverance was sort of first conceived?
Yeah, it was summer of 2016.
So if you were to go all the way back, maybe for Dan and Chazz, for yourselves as well, if you were to go back before you even had any kind of contact with Deliverance or before it was a thing, what was one thing you wish you knew? And what would you do differently? I'm sure that you've learned a lot, but is there a single thing that you wish you knew that you maybe had done differently before, working with Deliverance? Maybe Dan, we'll start with you.
Art-wise, it's hard to really say too much because, I've put on over 10,000 hours of extra painting since then, and that alone is kind of the biggest difference between now and then, that I've just gotten better at painting and my process has gotten a lot better. Knowing AI is coming, that would have been a big thing to know back then.
So how's that impacted your sort of workflow? Has it been negative or positive?
It's kind of similar to just, so back when I would design an angel, I'd just get a bunch of inspiration and resources, and that I'd have Pinterest up and Google and whatever else to just kind of get a bunch of ideas going. And AI is pretty much just a new version of Pinterest for me, where I'll just use it to generate a bunch of just neat ideas that I think are cool, and I can be like, oh, that's a cool little belt or a cool little thing there, and then that's about it. It's in the idea stage of things and in the sketching stage of things, but beyond that, it's not in the process. It's really just a tool to generate ideas that's really fast, which is nice. But I just make sure that by the end, every pixel of the painting is my own pixels, and that's kind of like my compass for that, essentially. It is nice for like just making a quick texture if you want to just have like, some wood grain on a handle or something. You can just get some nice wood grain and throw it on there and then paint it in to make it look nice and make it not look weird. But it's really just a tool that shouldn't ever really leave the idea and sketch phase of the thing. But as long as kind of used responsibly, I think it's really nice.
So in terms of one thing that you've learned in terms of your artistic approach, has there been a certain process that's been refined and that you now do at a better rate than you when you first started?
Yeah. Like I mentioned earlier with like the whole knowing Andrew's vision for the thing, me knowing that very well at this point helps a ton because I don't have to have nearly as many check-ins. I kind of get the idea of what the character's abilities are going to be, what the character's lore and background are going to be. Sometimes I'll kind of add to that. One of the new angels, Damascus, got his name right this time. He's this angel who kind of takes on hardship and fights darkness and stuff. So like pulling in things like a sackcloth, which makes a lot of religious sense for him. Things like that I'll often add to the context of the story. But the process is pretty much I'll just go into like a sketch mode and get something really rough out digitally with color. I don't use the sketchbook as much anymore just because it's not as fast of the process and I've gotten more familiar with using the tablet at this point. So really it's just like some type of digital sketch. I'll run it by the team. Like, hey guys, how do we feel about this direction? And then if we like it, great. If not, we scrap it and I start again. And then we just keep going through that however many iterations it takes until we get something that we're happy with, that we feel like it accomplishes the vision for the characters' abilities and story, and it kind of meets all the criteria of our style that we have. Then I'll move into final painting, and I kind of just go stealth mode for a while, and I'll come back at the end of the week with a painting.
It feels like Christmas morning every time Dan is like, "Hey, I have something. You have a minute? I have something to show you." I'm like, "Yes, I'm so excited. It's so cool to see just every single art piece Dan puts together." At this point, he just has such a knowledge base of what works in Deliverance, and when he's doing something now, he knows how. Like he already has thought about how it fits into the world, and there's a lot I think that we've learned over time that about the world of Deliverance, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but like where does this if he's designing like a demon minion of some kind, where does this minion fit in to the rank and file of the other demons, or is it an outlier somehow? It does. And I want to say one particular minion type, the Dark Acolyte, which is a new minion that is in the expansion. We started out with this idea of a minion. We needed a minion with a range of 3 because everything either had a range of infinite, a range of 2, a range of 4, or a melee range. And we just had nothing that had a range of 3. So we're like, all right, let's do something that's interesting. And we came up with this idea of the Dark Acolyte that's gonna that has a range of 3. And over time, like as we developed the story, Dan suggested that they're tied to one of the main villains, and a lot of other kind of lore, I feel like you're now able to just implement into the characters, and it's like I'm the, I guess you could say, like the designer, the visionary or whatever. But a lot of the time you're like, hey, this is how these guys fit. And I just simply say, wow, that's incredible. I remember, and then it's like, I have no feedback at all. It's just, yeah, that's perfect. Let's run with that. That happens. That type of, response comes out so often nowadays. But in the beginning, when I was working with Dan, I would spend maybe 4 to 6 hours putting together a kind of a presentation, if you will, for each angel. Like each character took my wife and I both sitting down together 4 to 6 hours of time. So 2 hours was really fast, and 6 hours were, certain characters would just take longer. We would come up with concept photos and other elements that we thought were really important. I remember I had my brother and sister-in-law. They are characters in the game. I took reference photos of each of them. I remember my brother-in-law, I took reference photos at church, and it was like right after he had gone to the beach. So he had like sunscreen on him and whatever. And it was just funny, taking like 30 photos of his face and making sure the face was done correctly and whatnot. And now it's like, Dan's like, I have an idea for like a Japanese samurai angel. All I do is say, go for it. If you have the vision in your head, I feel like he knows the system enough that, which is really, I guess, for people listening to this podcast, the lesson that I would personally draw out is that by working with the same artist versus fragmenting into a bunch of different artists, the same artist will take longer to produce. Obviously they're producing more content. If you divide the content into thirds and you have 3 artists that you work with, then you're going to get more pieces quicker, but the style is going to be different with each person. The learning curve is going to be different, and you're going to start from 0 with each person. And maybe one of them learns quicker and the other one learns slower. And so you've got to figure out how to kind of bring them all along. And I think that's one of the areas that for Deliverance, I felt, because it's a religious game, it's a inherently kind of a Christian product. I knew we were fighting an uphill battle on a lot of different fronts, and with the target audience. So, I know there are people that are like, well, there is no God. I would never play a game like this. I was hurt one time when I was young at church, and I think that church is the worst, and I would never play a game with a Bible verse in it. That's not my target audience. So the people that are my target audience, so I'm not going to try to convince a person like that they should give it a go. They might actually see it and be like, oh, this doesn't look like the cookie cutter thing I expected. I'll give it a try, But for those that are the core audience, I felt like and me being one of those people, I feel like most Christian media is like cheesy, it's low budget, it's low quality.
Oh, preachy.
It's preachy. It's more of like a cash grab, like a quick cash grab. Honestly, like the up until this point, my inspiration for the best Christian product ever before this was VeggieTales, because it was really, really good for what it was, right? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't trying to be, it just didn't feel like a cash grab. It felt authentic, right? So one of the ways that I wanted this to be authentic is that the art needed to make a statement that the game takes itself seriously. The art is like, I tried to make it overdone, because I believed that if I settled with something that was cheap and, affordable, quote unquote, I felt like people would see it and say, this is just another cheesy Christian, production. And the serious fans, the people that are really kind of secretly hoping for something that they could be proud of, that they could play and actually say, wow, this isn't good because it's Christian. It's not the Christian version of like a dungeon crawler, but this is actually like a really good dungeon crawler. And I felt like the art was a major component of that, and just getting it right and being hardcore. And actually, Dan, if you want to expand on this, there were so many times where I'm like, okay, I would pay you hourly, right? And there would be a lot of times where you're like, we finish 8 or 9 of the angels in the base game, and then you're like, I spent 12 hours on the first character, Christine, to bring her up into line with the other angels. And I'm like, I thought that art piece was done. Like, it looked really good and everything like that. But Dan's like, nope, it's not enough. And I've just learned to trust Dan. When Dan says something is not quite good enough, then I'm just like, hey, you got to do what you got to do. Like, I trust you now. But maybe you could speak to that a little bit, because that was something we learned in the process.
Yeah, so one thing this is part of kind of the way I work. A lot of people aren't this way. They're more sane and can just set something down when they're done with it and move on with their life. But I'll put something down and I'll kind of just leave it there in the back burner versus taking it off completely. And that'll be like, okay, let me go work on something else for a bit, and then I'll come back to it in like 2 weeks and just look at fresh eyes and be like, okay, how is this thing looking now? Let me flip it back and forth. Let me just kind of like rotate it, trying to figure out what's going on. And sometimes it's just small things like, oh, there's a tangent here and there, or a small little squiggle that shouldn't exist exists. But other times it is more major things of like, oh, the shading here just doesn't look quite right on the shoulder. Let me fix this. Or with Damascus, for a while he just looked like a tan dude that's white with a beard. I'm like, no, he needs to look like he's got the right ethnicity. So let me go in and actually darken his skin, add some more hair on his forearms and things like that. So he actually looks like the character he's supposed to be, not just another character that's very generic. So sometimes they're quick adjustments, sometimes they're not, but that's just kind of the best way that I found works for me, is to be able to just put something down for a bit and come back to it after I've let it kind of resonate for a little. With Deliverance, this last project, the amount of art kept me very busy with always something else to jump over to, because we had a scenario book that had about 30 pieces of art. The campaign book had like 20. The characters in the game are another about 20. So we're already at around like 70 pieces of finished illustration. And then there's a bunch of just like emblems and other things thrown in there too, which there's around 100 pieces of art in this game. So definitely a lot of things got painted. And there's a lot of things that I could just move on to and just set something to the side for a bit, forget about it, come back to it later with fresh eyes, and give it that last 5%, last 10% makes all the difference.
Hey, crowdfunding nerds, if you're looking for an awesome fulfillment partner for US shipping, you should really consider Bridge Distribution and Fulfillment. I personally use them. I've used them for multiple projects. They do such a great job. They also can fulfill Amazon orders and get you prepped for Amazon and their warehousing team. I have been so happy using Bridge Distribution. I'm really proud that they're sponsoring us. If you reach out, bridgedist.com, that's bridgedist.com, let them know we sent you. All right, now back to the show.
Chazz, maybe going back to the original question, is there anything you wish you knew before you started with the Deliverance project, and what would you do differently?
As far as anything that I would do differently, I probably just like the design process. I probably would have taken more time to learn what game design is and the steps that are involved in it. Dan gave me a really great reference to go through, and I've gone through a lot of videos that he's recommended on that, and it's been really helpful. Both Andrew and Dan can attest to, just from when I started to today, the difference in like game design. But I think just part of that, it would also kind of have hindered me, I think, because I think I would have been too stuck on the formula of like what needs to be checked and what doesn't need to be checked. And coming in as like a fan that really, really cared about the game, I was one of those people that I had to have had to rein in recently with the playtesters, is just that really overexcited puppy that wants to add in all the really cool things. And that was really good. But I think if I were to take it a step back, going back, I probably would have reined that in a little bit sooner, a little bit earlier. I think that would have helped the game design a lot more.
So what kind of things specifically did you look into? Was it certain mechanics, or was it certain games, or what kind of things did you learn that kind of help you moving forward?
A lot of it was just terminology and mechanics. I remember sitting when I first started with the other members of our team, and they were like throwing out terms like breakpoints and, odds and evens for things, and, how many distances that need to be working together. And a lot of them I still I'm trying to wrap my head around, because there's a lot more. It's a lot more of a science than I initially thought it was. But terminology was a big one, just kind of understanding the lingo, understanding what the play space that I'd be playing in, and being able to utilize those tools properly. A big part of what I was learning was game mechanics, common game mechanics, and breakpoints. Those were the two that I had to learn a lot about. What makes a mission become too hard? When does it run away from you? When does a demon overscale on its damage and it's not fun to play anymore? At what point does the mission and the demon no longer work together because one or the other isn't a part of helping each other, but now they're hindering each other because you've gone through all the fodder, and now it's just, I'm going to sit here and poke this guy for 5 damage every turn, and I can out heal his damage. So a lot of those things is what I had to learn and go through. And a lot of it was, here's a thing. And Dan and Andrew are like, no, that's not a thing. Like that's like instantly broken. Like, we haven't even played it yet. And I was like, man, I thought this was awesome. But, that was also something that I learned going into this, is how to take that criticism, with a grain of salt. I wasn't really someone that was great at criticism. And if you're going to be in any type of creative space, to people who are listening, I think you need to make sure you can take that criticism and be willing to see this baby that you just, spent so much time with developing over the last couple hours and growing and pouring your ideas into, all of a sudden just have a hammer taken to it. Like, no, try again. And that's okay. Like, what you build from the pieces after that vase is shattered is going to be 1,000,000 times better than what you thought was really good without any feedback at all. And that was something that I had to learn really quickly, and that it wasn't personal, but it was like, something that they wanted to do for the bettering of the game and myself, like as a designer and a developer, for me personally. And that was something that I really appreciated. And that wasn't something that took me a long time to learn. It was maybe like, 2 times that they did that. And I was like, oh, okay, I got it. If I were to go back and tell myself, be ready for it, I probably wouldn't have taken the first couple of times so hard. But it was still a really great learning process throughout the whole thing. So yeah.
And then other times, like on the opposite side of the coin, you're I feel like you have more of a voice now, right? Like, we were just talking yesterday about something that I did, or it was this week about something I did in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, hey, I really like this thing that I wrote. And you're like, here's a huge problem. You're like, oh, this is a huge problem. You got to fix this. And the Chazz of 6 months ago would have been like, this is great.
Yeah, I remember when I was a part of the playtesters for the base game, you were asking for feedback, and I would give it every now and then, and be like, oh, here's some grammar errors, or this didn't play super well, and I think maybe you could change this. But I was really hesitant because I saw you and Deliverance as this really awesome project that I didn't want to offend. And I had no, at that point, I had no desire to really be a part of it full time as I do now, but I still really liked the game. I still believed in the project and what you were doing. And so I was like, I don't want to step on his toes and say his thing that he made is awful. And there's things that are broken and stuff you have to take back, because there's been so much work you can see already in it. And then now it's like, you give me this page-long story interlude, and I'm like, yeah, this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and this isn't. One of the things was you were writing the angels coming in, and it was like that wouldn't work if they're in this space, because how are you going to have a battle here if they're saying it's now protected and nobody can come into it? And I was like, that's just things that I would not have said before. I wouldn't have tried to pick things apart. And yeah, I definitely have a voice, I'd say now, to kind of give that feedback in a more critical manner.
So Andrew, what's the one thing that you would do differently if you had to start Deliverance all over again?
My answer is, well, I have two answers. The one is probably the most correct answer is listen to my wife more. It's funny because the people that are closest to you, I don't know if you guys are the same, but my wife is like my number one playtester, especially from the very beginning. Number one playtester. She's part of the target audience, if you will, where she's like, she plays games and she is looking, hoping for a game like this and whatnot. But I remember the first version of Deliverance I made was 6 battles long, and we fought in the first battle. Like the first playtest ever was Christy and I, my wife and I, and we played 2.5 hours in the first battle by itself, and we died. And we were using all sorts of prototype components, and everything was drawn with with markers and blank paper and stuff. And she was like, you really should cut this down to like 2 battles, or and that's it. Like, there's no way that we're going to be able to play for as long as it takes to make 6 battles, right? And it sounds right. But I'm like, no, wait, let's just do 5 battles now. Let's make it through 5. I'm sure that with some adjustments I can make changes and it'll be great. And she was like, I really think you should do like 2 or 3. And if I just listened to her at that moment, I think we would have cut like 2 years off of development time. It's just like, that's what I ended up doing. And there's so many lessons that I could point to that are like that she just some people have a really good gut feeling that I think I wish I put more credit into my wife in particular with what she says, because she's not as much of a hardcore gamer as I am, but she has a mind that is really, really, I don't know exactly how to express it other than she's right most of the time. And I should have listened a lot more. I'm very stubborn. So, and then I guess, from like a practical standpoint, it took me like 6 months to make the first prototype. And I did like my very best. If I made a chest piece armor, I did the art of the chest piece on the blank card. And I just spent all this time making each and every, crafting lovingly this first prototype. And the very first game was just like, dude, this doesn't work. That doesn't work. I just started taking a Sharpie to everything. And if I had to make new cards or whatever, I just started doing them sloppy and you could barely read my handwriting. And that latter process was way more effective than spending a lot of time lovingly on this prototype, thinking about every little thing. And it's like, no, what's the essential information I need? I don't have time for this. I just need to get another playtest out. And so making a dirty prototype as quickly as possible and iterating as quickly as possible was super duper important. I wish I learned that early on.
Yeah, I was going to piggyback off of that too and say, like, within the design space, I wish I would have done that a lot earlier, because that was something that we started doing kind of halfway through, where it's like, let's just get a really messy version to the table that we can play, that we can test and throw things against, instead of trying to make this perfectly, 90% done thing right away. Because it's going to get smashed. It's going to be taken apart, and you're going to have to take the little pieces and put them back together. And I think, one other thing for people who are listening is like, don't spend so much time trying to get your drafts perfect. Don't try to get your prototypes or your missions that you're trying to develop perfect right away, because when it gets to the other people on your team, when it gets to your play testers, when you get it to test and try yourself, you're going to notice things are wrong, probably from the ground up, and you're going to have to do some adjustment anyways. So like, don't spend time trying to make sure that everything is perfectly placed and everything is in the right spot. Like, just get something to try it, to develop it, to play it and see where it goes, instead of having this, beautiful, shiny prototype, because it's not going to be beautiful and shiny for very long.
So how do you find the difference between playtesting on something like Tabletop Simulator, which digital, a little bit awkward, you're, on microphones and headphones, and then versus playing with a physical prototype face to face, because it's a very different experience. I suppose the game is not going to exist in virtual reality. It's going to exist as a physical product. So I'm sure it's a very different experience physically. And this is, I think, maybe one of the dangers designers could fall into. They've only play tested digitally, and then they go set up their game. Actually, this game takes an hour to set up because there's all these components. So
you can't just copy and paste in real life.
Yeah. So what has been the experience in terms of playtesting digitally versus playtesting face to face with fans, or however you've done it?
So I'll start with the pros, and I'm sure a lot of people know the pros. You can change things on a whim. You don't have to go to a printing manufacturer or get the pieces printed out, or you don't have to do it on, no offense to you, Andrew, but like on, 9x10 note cards and paper and hand drawn things. Like the beauty of Tabletop Simulator is that for $20, it's on Steam, $20, not a sponsor, but you can go and upload things and play in this sandbox and try things and see where it works or doesn't work and why something like this would be nice or not nice to have. And then you can scrap it and you're at nothing lost besides time and uploads and having to find a new JPEG or whatever. But when you do get it to a table, like you said, Sean, there's that aspect of community and interpersonal interaction that you don't really get that on Tabletop Simulator unless you're doing it with like a camera. And I've done that with some of my playtesters as well, but being able to tactically feel the product, I'd say if it's your first product that you're trying to bring to life and you want to see and simulate that, do that like 90% on tabletop, so that way you can try the components, see how things interact with each other, get people to touch, or not really touch, but like to see and interact with your game mechanically. But then once you're ready to have a prototype, you should go and have people sit down and interact with the pieces and let maybe these cards are the wrong size, or I don't really see how this fits in a table, on an actual person's table, because on Tabletop Simulator you can shrink or grow your tokens and your components, and then when you go to sit down, it's like, oh, this would never fit on anybody's coffee table or on their dining table. Like, this is just too huge or too tiny. And like you said, you can see how long something takes to set up or tear down, and that's not something you get on Tabletop Simulator, because you could save the table and just have it ready, or drop a whole object set onto somebody's seat, and that's something completely lost, but it's still a really valuable tool. I think where Tabletop Simulator shines is for things like expansions. You already understand and have the rules set from your base game, and that how long things take to set up. You understand how things are going to be on a general table space. Now we can really dive into the mechanics and play with the things that are not foundational. So understanding is kind of going back to what Dan and Andrew were talking about earlier, is like understanding the foundational lanes that you need to develop and pave, so that way you can start putting cars on that road later on down the line. Takes so much longer, but now that the foundation is set, everything else should go a lot faster. So I think with respect to physical, like we did quite a bit of playtesting with the components in a physical manner at like different conventions at Strong Tower Con, and that's where I got to do it. Was at the Strong Tower convention in Wisconsin. And that was very different of an experience, seeing people's reaction like to the component and to the art and to the minis and to the standees. And it was just, you work with the playtesters for so long that I don't want to say they get desensitized to it, but they kind of get used to seeing the same thing, and you get used to seeing the same thing. You forget that this product hasn't actually been in somebody's hands before. So aside from like the design and the mechanics, it's just a really nice way to re-encourage you and your team that this is something people want. You look at the same art, you look at the same missions and the books over and over again. Like I said, you forget that this is something that hasn't really seen the public light of day. And going to those conventions or going to wherever you can to publicly playtest in person, to see that joy and that excitement on people's face when they look at the new art or touch the new component, is a really nice reminder of what you're doing. So I don't want people to only get stuck on the mechanic side. Like, remember what you're doing and remember the joy of what you're doing it for. And that's a really great way to remember that.
Yeah, I also think there's a social side to board games. I know you probably
Of
all
course.
have a friend who said, "Oh, check out this film; it was so funny," and then you watch the film; it's not funny at all, just because they watched it with a group of people and everyone was laughing together, and that sort of that they remember the film within the context of how they experienced it, rather than maybe the merits of the film itself, whilst you're seeing it alone by yourself in the room. And I think it's the same with board games, where people there's a social element to board games, and this actually impacts how they play. So when I play board games, I actually actively don't seek to win games. I actively seek to play the game to make it as fun for other people, especially if I'm hosting, where I might actually intentionally lose because I want someone to have the kind of the fun, or I might, slow my wife down just to mess with her or whatever. But it's those experiences, I think, which make the games fun, rather than who won, who lost, and that type of thing. I think you missed out on Tabletop Simulator. That is something I think you can only experience face to face with people. And then there's an advantage and disadvantage to that when you're playtesting, right? Because if you have a very kind of charismatic group of people, then a very boring game could be made quite interesting. If you have a very dull group of people, you might think, oh, this game's kind of dull and boring, but it's just those maybe groups of people don't express themselves in certain ways. So I think that's also worth kind of observing. And have you noticed anything like that with certain groups with Deliverance, where some people are very animated and other people are less so? And then what has, in terms of getting feedback, what has that been like with those types of people?
I could put my thoughts in on this one.
Yeah, go for it.
I'll say that playtesting in person, the most valuable input that I receive from playtesting in person is the body language of the playtesters. Sometimes that you ask, like, what did you like most about the game, is a very specific question that will get an answer. It's like, oh, I liked this the most. But if you ask, like, did you like the game? Everyone's answer is going to be yes. But if people were sitting back on their phone, not paying attention, and like, oh, is it my turn again? Okay. And then back to their phone, they're not engaged. And there are other people that just look like they have just like a grouchy look on their face, arms folded, looks like a rat died in their mouth, and they just, it's like, dang, this person's not into it, or whatever. Or maybe it was too hard, or maybe they did something that was super underwhelming and they weren't happy about it, or whatever. But that information, you'll never get that from Tabletop Simulator.
Yep.
And
I'll also add that there, like you said, Andrew, there's definitely pros and cons, because in person you learn a lot more from the subtle nonverbal cues. Nobody's ever gonna, unless it's like just a really bad game or they're like a really mean person, they're never just gonna like rip you apart in person. Some people might, if they know that you're like actively looking for good quality critical feedback, and they're not, they don't want to pull any punches, but there's some like psychological hold and block that most people have when you're looking at someone face to face. You're like, well, I can't be mean to this guy. Like, look at how nice he is. Like, he's so earnest about this game. But on Tabletop Simulator, people, I found, especially when I give them the option to report their findings anonymously via like a Google form or like an email or a text or whatever, I get like pages of people being like, this sucked and this wasn't good. I liked this part, but that was completely overshadowed by the fact that this didn't work and this didn't work and this angel's unbalanced. And I'm like, okay, nice. We can work with this. And this, there are really great things for both. And I think that depends on what type of feedback you're looking for and how you want to go about it.
So Andrew,
one thing to
sorry,
real
ahead,
quick.
Dan.
Two different types of playtesting that you do. One is actually learn if your game is broken and how the mechanics work. And in that case, you kind of keep a very open format to when you're setting up the playtest. You kind of just need to know what's working, what doesn't. If you're going for that, then yeah, you want to have like a longer time with those players so you can kind of really get into every system that you have. But if you are going for, hey, just try this game out, it's pretty much done. I just want you to experience it. It's a very different type of playtest. And in that situation, you really want to carve out a sample slice that will fit in the appropriate amount of time for that player to experience your game. Because one thing we did at the Origins convention at first when we got there is like, okay, let's just set up a new game every time we play. We'll figure out what bad guys are fighting every time we play and all this stuff. And then we just kept going over and over time with every playtest. So eventually what we switched to was, okay, we're using these demons, these bad guys. We're going to use this map layout. We're going to use these talents with them. And that's it. This is the sample that we're going to let the players play against. So you got one big guy, you got one ranged character to fight, a heavy damage dealer, and a swarmer. We're giving them that sample to play against. They can pick their angel, but that's it. They're going to sit down, pick an angel, and play. Everything else is already set up and done. And having something like that, a more curated slice for them to get a good understanding how the game works, is very helpful because it makes it much more timely. And you know that you're showing them everything you want to show them. So there's two very different versions of playtesting. Just want to make sure that that's clear.
Yeah,
That's
I
helpful.
think that going into the playtesting, there's an onus that has to go on the playtester and the people who are hosting it to know what you want to find going into it. So like when we do playtesting for a certain mission, there are several things I'm looking for. Is the difficulty good? Are you able to win within a certain amount of time? Is the mechanics interesting? And if you go into it wanting to answer all of those questions right away, sometimes you will. Sometimes you get enough feedback and enough information from that playtest to get all the questions answered that you needed answered. But I found it a lot more effective to go in with targeted questions and ask them, with this in mind, try to break this, or with this in mind, I need to understand where you're coming from when you do X, Y, and Z's actions. That way, they have a plan going in. It's not just mindlessly playing another skirmish, because when you're playing with playtesters, their time is valuable too. They're taking time out of their night or their week to come and sit down and play your game that's not even done yet. So going in and giving them a goal is super important, and it gives you good quality feedback instead of just that was nice or that was good, this worked or that didn't work and I don't know why. So having those goals set up beforehand was something that Andrew and Dan and I wanted to make sure we had to make every single playtester night be effective and meaningful. Even if they're replaying the same mission, it's okay, we're coming at it from a different angle because we changed this. Let's see how this specific mechanic adjusts how you guys do something. And I need to see that reaction. And maybe you could be priming them to act a certain way, but it's just an overall respect for both people's time that you're going to get good quality feedback and good quality gameplay out of them, instead of just mindlessly wandering about what you set up, hoping that they bump into the thing you want them to. Because the worst thing that could happen is you change mechanic Z, right? And you tell them, okay, this is something that I need you to test. You hope that they're just going to bump into it, and mechanic Z never happens. And you just wasted 2 hours of both of your time. Mm-hmm. It's okay, well, we need to run it again because I didn't get the information I needed. Or you think, well, it worked great, and you didn't even test the thing you changed. Going in with good set goals is something that I would recommend for playtesting and making sure that you're utilizing that time wisely.
Andrew, maybe in finishing up here, do you want to speak into how you rallied the Deliverance community behind the Kickstarter? I know you funded day one. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about how the community was involved in actually seeing this project come to life.
The first thing is that when I created this project, my first thought was, I know that eventually I'll work on it and develop it internally, and I think it's amazing, but I don't truly know, in the end, as a marketer, we've marketed well over 300 projects on, through crowdfunding now, and, approaching probably 400, close to 400 now. But every single one of them, it's the market will tell you if they like your thing or not. If they like your presentation, if they like the way that the way that you share what it is that you think it is going to be different than the way that you say it and what how your audience receives that. And if it's, that in the end, no matter how amazing you think a game is or a product is that you're making, the market will tell you how much they value it. And that's the scary moment. When you launch on Kickstarter, that is a scary moment. You're pressing a button saying, I'm hoping that everyone else agrees with me. And so for me, when I started this product process, I thought, okay, first of all, this is a very unproven niche. It's, if anything, it's proven that it's not profitable because Christian games are not as good as normal games, and that's generally true. And so here I am with this Christian product. Like, I don't want to spend a lot of money into the marketing of this thing if people don't genuinely want it. So the first thing I did was I set a goal for myself that seemed really, really high, but within the realm of possibility. If people really want this thing, then I should be able to acquire 1,000 emails completely organically without spending a penny on advertising at all. And if I can't, then if there's just, I just try every single thing and I just can't figure a way to do it, then people don't want it. And that was my kind of self-test, if you will, as a marketer, where, you know, I have a marketing knowledge. I know how to use Facebook ads. I know how to use Google ads. I can get people on an email list, but can I really get people passionate about this product where they're just interested to buy the product because it's the amazing thing they were hoping for? And that was my test. My litmus test was to see, can I get people genuinely interested? And and I actually did this podcast, I want to say 5-6 years ago now, on the Board Game Design Lab, is like how to market a board game. And I shared exactly what I did to earn those 1,000 emails, like 1,100 emails and 900 people in the Facebook group. And when we launched on Kickstarter, we funded on the first day for our first product. That was in 2021. And we raised $141,000 on the first day. And 60,000 of it was from the organic emails that I received, and about 60,000 more was from the paid advertising that I ran. I ended up running like $6,000 worth of paid ads, and it ended up returning $59,000 back, and probably a lot more now because we've run another Kickstarter and we've sold a lot more product and since then. But the fruit of that labor was, I can't understate how valuable it was for me to kind of, I really feel in some ways like I'm paving the road for other, you know, designers in genres like this, like religious themed games. But if you want to know if your game is going to do well or whatever, try to get 1,000 people on your email list. That was my personal big, hairy, audacious goal. Maybe it's like a few hundred, but I feel like you need to get enough people that are interested in your thing. And, you know, if you're going to make it and have a successful business, if you just want to make a thing and have it exist, that's different. I wanted to make something that became, you know, something big, that was almost like a legacy of mine on this earth. You know, I feel like maybe that's a bigger goal than a lot of other people have with a product. They just want to see it enter into the world and others enjoy it. But so that was the first Kickstarter. And like the second Kickstarter, the follow-up, I really feel like so we made $170,000 on the first day, and which actually seemed like, you know, this was in September 2024, and it seemed like we should have made more on the first day, but economically, you know, the U.S. was in much more difficult economic times by then, and I think that, you know, people didn't have as much disposable income to spend, but we still raised over $500,000. So the first campaign raised $300,000. The next campaign did 60% more than that. So we raised, you know, $505,000. But I would say that I would personally credit the success of the second campaign to diligent communication. So every single month, like without fail, we give an update on the very last day of the month. We also, just so that people are communicated with, and it's an expectation we've set for our fans, and they trust us. And the game was really good. The first game was really good. People liked it, and it got really high ratings and all sorts of stuff like that. But the diligent communication kept fans on board, where they're like, not only do I like the first game, but I'm going to support the expansion because I want more of that content. I support you as a publisher There are people that will say, we'll back anything that you guys make, and that kind of thing.
And Andrew, was
so,
that diligent communication something you did when you had 10 people on your email list? Did you do it from the very beginning, or was it something that you did once you crossed a threshold of email subscribers?
That's a great question. Actually, we were diligent from the beginning. So I remember I had under 100 people on my email list. And before I had Kickstarter updates, it was, and even to this day, we try to do a monthly email as well, which I'm like 95% successful. Some months I skip or whatever, but in general, that monthly email was like the cornerstone of everything that I do. Like if you're following along, if I get you on an email list, that means nothing. Eventually, I mean, it's my communication with those people that kept them on board, and that, they were very interested in the product they play tested years ago. But now to just kind of follow along, it feels like what you're giving them is you're kind of giving them a ride along with you, and they have now a seat on the bus that you're driving to your destination, and they get to see the sights that you see and other things like that. And that makes people want to support you. And so, there was also, like, I'll mention for those that are launching a first product, if it's a passion project of yours, I had a lot of friends and family step out on the first one. A lot of people were like, people that I was in high school with were like, hey, I love what you're doing, and here's $20 to just support you. I never play games, but I support you. And then the next campaign, none of those people came out. My mom and dad did, my in-laws and a few others, but everyone in the second campaign backed it for the product. That was it. Everyone was like, all right, we gave you your little push out of the nest, little bird. Now you're full grown. You find your own food, you're fine. And so that was an interesting switch. So I felt like the first funding in some ways was exaggerated, whereas the second, the backers were, not all in there for the product alone, but the next project, we were still able to raise more money, 60% more money, and the backers were all there for the game. So it's very interesting.
Wonderful. Well, folks, I think we've covered a lot here. There's plenty for people to go through. Make sure to leave your comments in the bottom of this video. Andrew will get back to you if you have anything in particular you want to know about Deliverance or about marketing Deliverance. It might be helpful to you guys. Thank you, Dan and Chazz, for joining us. It's been a blast having you on. And yeah, until next time, stay nerdy. Hey folks, this episode is brought to you by Hero Time Manufacturing. That is Hero Time, the numeral 1.com. Hirsch Gleck has been a regular on our podcast. We highly recommend his services. He is a man of integrity. Hero Time, they can make anything. They've got competitive pricing, and they even do game prototypes. So make sure to check out Hero Time, numeral 1.com. A link is in the show notes. And if you use the code crowdfundingnerds101, you can get a 3% discount on your production through them. Let's get back into the episode.